Shalom, beloved. My name is Ms. HiSmith, and I'm so glad that you've decided to join me here for the APA Apology Response series. Now, for those of you who are not aware, back in February of 2021, the American Psychological Association, known as the APA, distributed a public apology to persons and communities of color for the part they played in promoting, perpetuating, and failing to challenge racism, racial discrimination, and human hierarchy in the U.S. There's a lot to cover, so let's begin. In this episode, we'll begin specifically at paragraph 12, part A, and I quote, "Whereas APA has recently adopted a framework that affirms that human rights are universal and inalienable, that racism is a violation of human rights, and that APA must oppose racism in all its forms." Close quote. So, beloved, here we have it. The APA has officially adopted the, quote, APA guidelines for psychological practice with ethnic and racial minorities, close quote, as a part of its framework for addressing race, racial discrimination, and race relations. This framework is designed to guide psychologists in their practice and research by emphasizing culturally competent approaches and acknowledging the universal and inalienable human rights of all individuals. The guidelines focus on the following: cultural competence, encouraging psychologists to understand and respect the cultural and ethnic backgrounds of individuals and communities they work with. Next is anti-racism, addressing and combating systemic racism and discrimination in psychological practice and research. Then we have equity and inclusion, promoting fair and equitable treatment for all racial and ethnic groups. This framework aims to enhance the effectiveness of psychological services and interventions by integrating an understanding of racial and ethnic diversity into professional practice and policy. Beloved, human rights are fundamental rights and freedoms to which all individuals are entitled, regardless of their nationality, ethnicity, gender, religion, or any other status. These rights are universally recognized and are intended to protect the inherent dignity and equality of every person. Human rights are often divided into several categories. Number one, civil and political rights. These include the right to life, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and the right to a fair trial. They protect individuals from abuses by the state and ensure participation in political processes. Number two, economic, social, and cultural rights. These encompass the right to education, work, adequate living standards, and participation in cultural life. They aim to ensure that individuals can live with dignity and access the resources needed for a fulfilling life. Number three, collective or solidarity rights. These include the right to development, self-determination, and a healthy environment. They address issues that affect groups or entire populations, such as environmental protection and the right of peoples to self-governance. Number four, human rights treaties and declarations. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UDHR. adopted by the United Nations in 1948. It outlines fundamental rights and freedoms. It is an international covenant on civil and political rights. These treaties further detail and legally bind countries to uphold human rights standards. Human rights are based on the principle of equality and non-discrimination, and they are intended to safeguard individuals from injustice and ensure their ability to live with dignity and respect. The statement, quote, "Racism is a violation of human rights," close quote, means that racism infringes upon the fundamental rights and freedoms that every individual is entitled to. Here's what this implies. Number one, a violation of dignity. Racism undermines the inherent dignity of individuals by treating them as inferior or less worthy based on their race or ethnicity. Human rights principles assert that everyone has the right to be treated with respect and dignity. Number two, a denial of equality. Racism contradicts the principles of equality, which is a core component of human rights. It creates and perpetuates unequal treatment and opportunities based on racial or ethnic characteristics, violating the right to equal protection under the law. Number three, obstruction of basic rights. Racism can obstruct access to essential human rights such as education, healthcare, employment, and housing. This denial of rights is a fundamental infringement on individuals' ability to lead a full and equitable life. Number four, a breach of international standards. International human rights documents, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and various human rights treaties, explicitly condemn discrimination based on race. Racism, therefore, breaches these internationally recognized standards and commitments. Number five, systemic harm. Racism often manifests as systemic or institutional discrimination, where policies and practices disadvantage certain racial groups. This systemic racism not only affects individual rights, but also perpetuates broader social inequalities, further violating the principles of justice and equity. In essence, declaring that racism is a violation of human rights underscores the idea that racism infringes upon the fundamental rights and freedoms that are universally recognized and protected, and that addressing racism is integral to upholding human dignity and equality. Beloved, thank you for hearing me out today, and I hope and pray that you continue to watch for more of the Free Square movement. Shalom.